and I really feel like I'm dressed to be on the repair shop today. Hey guys, it's Sarah from Just My Typewriter, and it's time to talk about typewriter accessories. So one of the questions I often get on Instagram, on YouTube, on Facebook is questions about my typewriter library, what books I've been collecting over the years for typewriter-specific reference materials, and then also questions about things like my typewriter tins. Now there are lots of things that were accessories to your typewriter when you were purchasing this out in the wild. Things like ribbons and papers and paper guides and pencils and cleaning tools. There are a lot of things that are associated with a typewriter that are still collectible items and things you can find while you're out antiquing or thrifting that don't always have to be as expensive as buying a typewriter. And I'm not buying a typewriter every week, but every time I go out thrifting or adventuring, I'm always looking for an item that is either a typewriter or typewriter adjacent. So I thought today we'd go over kind of the things I have in my collection and some tips and tricks for looking for these items when you're out there in the wild looking for things. I know I say the wild a lot, but what I really mean is dusty and dirty and maybe moldy antique stores. The first thing that comes to mind with typewriters and kind of stationery in general is finding vintage paper to go with your typewriter. Now, we talked about paper in a Typewriter 202 episode, which I'll link down below, but there are lots of different papers that can go into a typewriter. A good typewriter can really take just about any weight of paper, so cardstock to really thin onion skin paper, and you don't always have to buy these new. So you can go online and buy all kinds of fancy paper, but if you go into a thrift store, or I've had a lot of good luck at Goodwills, you can usually find just boxes of paper that have been never used. Now you might get some weird ones, like one time I got a box of balloon paper, but you might also find some really cool vintage paper. And one of the tips that I learned from Amber, who was my guest on the Typewriter 202 episode, was that she goes to estate sales and the first thing she checks are the drawers in the desk in the office of the estate sales. You don't know what kind of paper you're going to find in there, if it's letterhead stationery with a business name on it, if it's fancy paper, if it's older paper. There is something just nice about the weight of older papers in an older typewriter or machine. The other thing is vintage postcards. I'm always picking those up when I go on trips, but I'm also looking for those when I'm out antiquing because you might find an unused one that would be really good for a pen pal letter. So that's something I keep in mind, the stuff we actually write on with typewriters. And I've written on some strange things with a typewriter. Another thing that you can look for while you're out antiquing and hunting is typewriter ribbon tins. Now, when you would get a typewriter and it has a ribbon on it, usually you've got two spools and whatever ribbon goes in between. When you'd run out of ink on that ribbon, you'd have to buy a replacement. And there were tons of companies that made replacement ribbons for typewriters in all kinds of different shapes, sizes. Materials was a big one. The difference between a nylon, which is a more modern material for typewriter ribbons, versus a cotton ribbon or a silk ribbon. All of these different weights and colors and manufacturers would have something just a little bit different that you could add to your machine to get it to function in the way that was your preference. Nowadays, a lot of these ribbon tins are out there on the market as just display items, and I've run into tons of these in antique stores and flea markets especially, and now I try to pick these up whenever I see them. So a ribbon tin can come in a couple different materials. It's typically tin, but there are cardboard ones out there and paper ones out there. It's going to have a lid as well as a base, and usually on the base it'll tell you what typewriter it was for, what weight it was. So this one, for example, was a Royal and it was a black ribbon. Now, every once in a while, you're going to get a spool on the inside of one of these ribbon tins, and that's kind of like a nice little added bonus. Modern typewriter replacements or typewriter ribbon replacements usually come on plastic spools, and I do save all of those because sometimes I have a machine that needs a very specific plastic spool. But if you can find these old metal spools, these really hold up well in a machine, and you might find that you have a typewriter that has one metal spool and a replacement spool on the other side, and you need to replace it with a metal one to match. So sometimes you can find typewriter tins with the spool on the inside. The other really cool thing about tins is just the vintage advertising you get on them. Some of the ones in my collection are nicer than others, but they have beautiful logos and designs on them. Every company did something different, and even the more text-based ones are still really illustrative and beautiful. So these have been something I've been focusing on collecting for the last couple of years a little bit more. Now, they can get kind of pricey depending on where you buy them. I bought a few on the internet, and when you add in shipping, it does add up really quickly. Now I'm looking to get my typewriter tins for under the $5 mark. That for me seems like a reasonable investment in most of them. So I've got quite a few. I always like to look for ones with really cool decals on them that are in good condition, and if they have anything extra in them, I'm usually willing to pay just a little bit more. So I found some that have old, like dead stock spools in them. Most of them are dried out, but it is kind of cool to see the spools with the original ribbons on them. I bought one at a flea market in Maine, and it had thumb screws in it, like little ones that go on an Olivetti. So that was kind of a cool find to also get some typewriter parts in my tins. So that's been something I've been adding, and man, I got a lot of them. And my most recent addition is also typewriter ribbon or typewriter tin associated. So I found this little display kit on eBay for I think $30, and I gave them an offer, and it is a display kit that would have been in a store that had all of the little spools in it. Now, it had all of the cardboard cartons in it originally. This was a Webster Star display kit. It has a little drawer that pulls out, and inside it has all these little cardboard cartons that has a top and a bottom, and inside it would have had probably just a spool with a ribbon on it as a replacement. But some of my tins actually fit, just the small ones, in here. So I've actually started storing some of my small little tins in this display case. It's so interesting and delicate, and I can't believe it's lasted this long. I have seen ribbon display pieces before. I saw one in an antique store at one point, but it was $150. So this little cardboard carton, while maybe not the most sturdy thing, it is a really cool piece of vintage typewriter history, and it's awesome to have it all together in one piece with my tin collection. And one other added detail is somebody used this to store small parts at one point, because this one says screws on the top of it. So typewriter tins have been another great part of adding to my typewriter collection without adding a typewriter to my collection. One other thing I've been trying to collect in the last year and a half is typewriter case keys. Have I been wearing this the whole time? One thing I've also been trying to collect is typewriter case keys. So if you bought a portable typewriter, usually it would come in a case that also had a key that could lock that case, so you could lock up your typewriter. Now, over time, a lot of the keys that go to these cases have been lost because they weren't really affixed to the case in any way. A lot of people would tie them on with string to the end of their case, and I bought so many cases that just have the empty string attached to the handle. So one thing I've been trying to do is look for vintage case keys that fit into my typewriter cases. It's not something that's necessary to make your typewriter work or to add to the value of your machine, but it's an aesthetic choice to have kind of a complete machine together by also having that case key. And a few months ago, I started collecting images of what other people's case keys look like, because I was in an antique store at one point, saw a pile of keys, and recognized this key. I looked at the shape and was like, I think that fits into one of my plastic Smith Corona cases. I bought it for $1, brought it home, and it fit my Smith Corona case. And suddenly I realized that there was a chance to look for other case keys here. Lots of vintage stores and antique stores and flea markets have little smalls sitting on their shelves, and almost every antique store I've been in or flea market I've been to has just a box of random keys. Often they are leftover truck keys or uncut house keys or keys to random doors that nobody knows where they were in the first place, but every once in a while you get little tiny keys in there as well, and it might be a good opportunity to search for a case key for your typewriter case. Now, what's difficult is this case key looks very similar to something like this case key, and they can be to very different things. So you have typewriter case keys, but there are also keys associated with winding clocks, and often these get put in the same box or in the same place, and they don't always fit into each other. So what I started doing was collecting pictures from other collectors of the keys that fit their cases in their collection, and I made a buying guide on my website so that you can go in and look at different pictures of keys. So when you're out there in the wild and you look at a key and you want to know if it fits into a typewriter, you can visually match it to some other typewriter collector's case key. So this is on my website, and I'll link this down below. I'm adding to it all the time. For me, case keys are a really nice way to add to my typewriter ephemera collection without making a big investment. Even if I buy a key that I think fits into a typewriter case and it doesn't, is only $1, so it's really not that big of a loss. Now I will say I find lots of suitcase keys that are not typewriter case keys, but it's always a fun little hunt to just kind of dig through, match it to my visual guide. I will say it's not always the most time-saving tactic. I really should look through it and memorize more shapes before I go into one of these environments, because looking them up on my phone and trying to load all the pages just takes a really long time. But for me, this has been a really fun thing that I've been trying to do in the last year or so, trying to hunt for case keys, just to give myself something else to look for. Not every antique store is going to have those typewriters, but everyone I've been in has that key pile. Now, when I'm looking for case keys, sometimes I also run into typewriter keys. You know, the things on the keyboard that you type with. We're all aware of key choppers, which are people who will go in and cut the tops of typewriter keys off to make jewelry or designs or use them in art. And I think that there's something very artistic about that process, but it also can be really damaging to typewriters in general, because those could have been machines that could have been saved or worked on. And again, it's a case-by-case basis for me. There are parts machines in my collection where it probably wouldn't matter if I removed the keys because the machine itself was just too far gone to begin with. But when you're looking for case keys, you might also see a pile of typewriter key tops. And this is something else I also recommend that you actually check through, because you might find some things that could be useful. For example, I was at a flea market looking at case keys, and I found a whole bin of typewriter keys, and I found some Smith Corona keycaps. The plastic ones from like the 1950s and 60s. What's cool about these is even though they've been popped off the machine, you can pop these back onto the typewriter stem that goes with that key. So these can still be used on some other typewriter despite being taken off of something else. So that's something I do recommend you look for. If you see any key tops, you can actually still use some of these. So the plastic ones that pop on and off, those are always a good one because somebody might need just one random key and you have a whole set there. You might also find glass top keys. Now, glass top keys are usually chopped at the stem, so you can't necessarily pop them back onto a glass top key machine, but if you have cracked glass on one of your keys, it can be really hard to find a replacement that's going to fit onto that machine because the glass is so small, the rings are hard to remove. If you would like to kind of tackle a project like that, you can use these boxes of removed keys as kind of replacement parts for those. So a few years ago, I was working on my Monster Royal 10 project, and I had to replace all of the key tops. The first thing I did was actually look for a key chopper sale lots, like a whole jar full of key tops, because I figured I could remove the rings around the tops and the glass and either the plastic piece underneath or the paper piece underneath and put those into my key cups. So if you've got that broken glass or you need to replace quite a few on your machine, you can use these key chopped ones to act as parts for that process. It is a little difficult. They do make a tool that specifically removes the rings around the glass. I didn't use one of those when I was working on mine. I bent the tabs back on the little ring with a butter knife and removed the cap and the little glass top to replace the keys. I don't recommend that because you can break them pretty easily. However, if you have a whole bucket of replacements and you're willing to play around with it a little bit, to be patient and try to get those replaced, it might be a good option. So don't stray away from the bins of key tops. They still have value to collectors and repair techs. It doesn't need to be the most sad visual. It can be a really great opportunity to give other machines new life or replace things on other machines. There's some other things related to typewriters that you might find that would be involved in the cleaning or maintenance process. So I've opened a few typewriter cases after purchasing the typewriter, and I just hear something rattling around in there, and you take the machine out and you might find a type slug brush, for example. It's a little brush that has little bristles that you would just brush over the top of those type slugs to clean them out, to kind of replace that cleaning process we have now, more as like a maintenance thing. I've also found some stationary items in cases before. I found this little hole punch, which doesn't punch through anything, but it's still kind of cool to have. I have found some examples of typewriter adjacent cleaning products online as well and have purchased those. So this little blower brush, for example, I'm not exactly sure what it was used for. I actually think it might have been for camera lens cleaning, but who knows, it could have been a typewriter product. And one thing I found on an antique store in, I think, Maryland, was this little type slug cleaner. It's kind of like silly putty on the end of a handle, and you would press it into your type slugs to clean off the tops of them. I think this is really cool, and it's nice to have the little box to go with it. It's almost like vintage advertising. For me, this is a cool little display piece and something that adds again more to the story of the typewriter. A lot of these products, despite being accessories, are kind of adjacent to the typewriter to tell a fuller picture of what it was like to own a typewriter. When you buy a new computer, you're gonna need a keyboard and a mouse, and you might need a mouse pad for that mouse, and you might need new headphones and a USB drive and all these other things that can be associated with the machine itself just to get it to operate in the way that is your preference. And there's all these choices that you as a user get to make along the way. And the typewriter is the same. You can pick the type of ribbon you want, what materials, what brand, the cleaning materials you would have used, all of these other accessories that go along with the typewriter to tell that fuller picture. And for me as a collector and maybe archivist, it's nice to have all these pictures or pieces in my collection to put together that full image of the typewriter industry and history. One other thing that I have found in typewriter cases is also typing books. So I found some vintage like typewriter thin paper, but I've also found some touch typing books, and you might find these in cases or while you're out in the wild. If you're looking through the bookshelves of a stall in an antique store, you might run into these, and these can be pretty valuable because they have these vintage instructions in them to show you how to type. I actually found a Type-A-Tune booklet with my Type-A-Tune, another typewriter adjacent accessory, and someone messaged me years after I bought it asking for scans of the original music in there, because it is hard to get your hands on the original printed paper material that goes along with some of these typewriters or typewriter adjacent products. So if you find vintage typing books or booklets that went along with them, user manuals, that might also be something that got left out of the case somewhere and then bought up by somebody to put in an antique booth. Those can be things that you could pick up along the way to kind of help, again, form your collection or even provide to other collectors who are looking for that thing to finish their complete machine. You may also find not necessarily manual typewriters, but typewriter toys to be something you can add to your collection. Sometimes these are cheaper. In my experience, these are usually around the $25 mark in my area because they're being sold as a vintage toy, which can be a collectible market. But I have run into a few that are typewriter adjacent over the years that are in my price range. My biggest win was that Simplex toy typewriter from 1904, 1903. This was made for the World's Fair, and it is a little display that celebrates the Louisiana Purchase. It was pretty rusted when I got it. I was able to rehab it a little bit, put it back together. This is not a typewriter, but it is a typewriter related toy. And for me, it's a collector's item in its own right, but it also adds some more depth to my collection. It tells more of the story before we get into 1960s Olympias, 1950s Smith Coronas, 1980s Selectrics. So this to me shows kind of the progression. Another thing that's really interesting, to me at least, is to collect vintage typewriter advertisements. And this is usually where I turn to online shopping. I don't always have the patience to sift through the bins when you go to an antique store and they have a whole setup of vintage advertisements, or to even go through a magazine and look for the old advertisements. So I usually buy these online. And a lot of times I'm also using that imagery in my videos as historical references to see things like the features and what color names were the typewriters originally sold in, where were they sold. A lot of those advertisements from vintage newspapers might tell you of local dealers, and then you've got the ones that are in the Sears catalog that are selling the on-brand from the manufacturer types of models of typewriters. These can come in so many different varieties. I really love the full color ones. I just think they're really gorgeous imagery. Often they might have some interesting gimmicks. There was the Golden Touch Underwood ad campaign that had the golden gloves. I did a video on that as well. I'll link that down below. It was a really weird kind of campaign line, but it made them stand out a little bit. My favorite is obviously the Underwood nail polish advertisement, and I actually do have a physical copy of this advertisement. I went and found one. But this to me was such a cool ad campaign and a really different way to look at typewriters that it's something I wanted to have and again tell my story of what it's like to be a typewriter collector from my perspective. I'm still looking for the actual bottle of Underwood red nail polish, which I don't think exists because I have checked everywhere online. So vintage advertisements are also something that I collect. I frame these and put them up, but then I also save them and keep them in my archives collection. You never know when you might need to go back and reference those materials. And one other really cool piece of vintage advertising that I found was actually a set of playing cards. And where are they? Here they are. So this is a set of playing cards. When I bought them, they were completely and the plastic never opened. And I committed the cardinal sin and removed them from their plastic because I wanted to see what they looked like on the inside. So these are just normal standard playing cards, but on the back side where there would have been like the red design from like Bicycle is an advertisement that features Shakespeare and a Smith Corona Galaxy. So it says, "With my Smith Corona portable, I can now spend more time at the theater." So he's just kind of talking about the advantages of having an electric Smith Corona. It's a full deck, so I could definitely play poker with this if I wanted. And I actually framed one of these in my office because for me, it's just such a cool way to advertise. I don't know how many more of these there are, but I did find this online and I think I spent less than $10 on it. So something like this can be really affordable as well. And again, it's just a really weird advertising item that contributes again to that typewriter picture. Postcards are also like this. I found quite a few typewriter related postcards. I usually buy these online as well. I don't always find these in person, but a keyword search can help you find these. I have one relating to the 2-ton Underwood typewriter that was on the Atlantic City Pier. I did a video talking about the typewriter factories, and that for me was a really cool find to have, and now it's framed in my office. So vintage advertising can take all forms and fashions, playing cards, postcards, and then the actual magazine ads themselves. And I'm going to put you right back here, Shakespeare. So a question I get all the time is, what type of books do I have in my typewriter library? And I have a mix of things. I have reference books that are really helpful when I'm doing research or looking into a model a little bit. I then also have the informative books that I read more like a nonfiction book. They have the history of something related to typewriters. I usually have that in my collection. And then I have the fun ones in my collection that are written by other typewriter collectors or people I've met in the typewriter world that to me it's really important to support. So I also have that section in my library. I only have 2 in my fiction category when it comes to typewriters. The first is maybe the first typewriter book I ever bought. It's Uncommon Type by Tom Hanks. I have seen this once in a thrift store. I bought mine online. So this is a bunch of short stories that feature typewriters written by Tom Hanks. Yes, that Tom Hanks. And this was around the time where I was just starting to get into typewriters. I had seen the documentary, California Typewriter, and that started me on this process. And so then I went also and bought the book by Tom Hanks. So these are all fictional stories. It's just a fun, nice little nightstand read and not a bad one to have in your collection. The other fiction book I have in my collection is actually a children's book. It's called Olivetti by Allie Millington. I picked this up when I was in New Orleans. I walked into a bookstore and it had typewriters all over the top railing of the store. And I was like, wow, this is great. Look, an Underwood 5. And then the store owner came over to me, and it was someone who actually watches these videos and fixes typewriters. So that was such a cool experience for me. That was Crescent City Bookstore in New Orleans in the French Quarter. And while I was there, I wanted to buy a book. So I did buy Olivetti. I read it on the plane on the way back from New Orleans. It's a really simple little read. It's a children's book, so be prepared for that if you decide to purchase. But it was kind of a cool little, for me, experience to find that book and have it, and one that I want to keep in my collection for that experience. And it's a nice little easy read. Let's go to reference books. Now, reference books, a lot of the information you can find about typewriters is online, but it requires some digging. And if you're looking for a bunch of pictures of typewriters with information related to them all in one convenient location, a reference book might be the way to go. Now, these can be expensive because they are made in smaller quantities by independent presses, but they are worth having in your collection if you want to do some sort of historical research or have it as part of the reference part of your collection, just so you have more info about typewriters. The first one is Typewriters, Iconic Machines from the Golden Age of Typewriters by Anthony Casillo. This has been really helpful for me, especially when I'm doing a little bit of research into specific features of machines. So one of the things I looked at was the Golden Shield of Smith Corona, and I also looked at that Underwood Golden Touch. And there was some information in this book as well. He outlines his collection, and there's beautiful photography in here of these machines, but it does provide some additional reference into those specific features or even advertising features that were really heavily pushed by the company during that golden age of typewriter manufacturing. So this is one I have in my collection. It is a really nice coffee table book to just have, so I recommend that one. This one is purely info-based. If you are looking for info, I recommend the Antique Typewriters from Creed to QWERTY by Michael Adler. And his name is Adler. How could you not trust this guy when it comes to typewriters? Here's another one, Typewriters: A Celebration of the Ultimate Writing Machine by Paul Robert and Peter Weil. Again, really great pictures. It's got this really nice wood grain look to the outside of it. A really great coffee table book, and also useful when it comes to doing references. So I also recommend this one. And the other reference one I have in here is The Iron Whim, A Fragmented History of Typewriting by Darren, Wershler-Henry. I bought this book because of the front cover. It is a simplex machine on the front of it. And this is more of that read through where you want to kind of get an overview of the history of the machine itself. I found this one to be a really easy read. I did enjoy reading this. It provided me with a lot of additional information. So that was super helpful to me as a collector. Okay, what's next? Ooh, the important category for me. These are books written by other typewriter collectors or typewriter collector community members. I think it's really important when we are looking at the preservation of these machines to support other creators in this space. That's why I'm always recommending other YouTube channels and other Instagram pages and Facebook pages. I think it's really important to create a digital place where we can all enjoy these things together. And buying other typewriter collectors and repair techs books is a big part of that for me. So there's a couple books in my collection, or quite a few books in my collection, that are written by other typewriter collectors, and I think it's important to spotlight those. The first is by Lucas. It's over here. I think this is so cool. So Lucas wrote his very own book on the Williams typewriter, Everything There Is to Know and More. And this was fascinating for me. It was a really quick read as well, but to learn the history of this machine, I've never seen a Williams in person. They're not really my style. I prefer the post-1940s machines, but to see the origin point of a lot of the things that we see in modern typewriters and to have it from the perspective of someone who is an expert on it is just so fascinating. He includes lots of pictures of advertisements and things within his collection that I just think are so great to have in one reference book. And he even has a liner note by Peter Weil, who wrote one of the other typewriter books I mentioned. So for me, this is like top tier, must support other creators, and it's great for me to have this in my collection. I'm so honored to have this, and I also think it's really important to support younger creators in the space as well. And Lucas has his own shop in Chicago, so I think it's really important to support people like Lucas writing books. And it is published by Loose Dog Press, which has published quite a few of the books in my collection. They did a series, and I have, I think, all of them, of short story collections, all written by other typewriter collectors, and they're all typed out by those collectors as well. So this is quite a big part of my collection. I've got backspaces, dead keys, margin releases. All of them have names that are related to typewriter parts or typewriter processes. I think these are fantastic. You can find them on Amazon. I try to buy these whenever they come out because I think it's important, again, to have that collection of things written by other typewriter collectors. So this I highly recommend, especially if you're also looking for the fiction category of related to typewriters. You can do that and get fictional stories about typewriters, but also support typewriter collectors. Oh, I also have, and maybe this is a little unfair because Lucas and I are both quoted in this book, but this is the distraction-free first draft, unplug, forget perfectionism, and write more than ever using a typewriter by Flint. So this book came out a year and a half ago. I was interviewed for this book, and it's such a really cool read to learn about the writing process. I am not a writer, so I don't always think about the drafting process, but Woz is a fantastic writer, and their exploration in how does the typewriter impact the writing process creates a really great crossover point for people who are interested in writing and then the typewriter collector side of things. So you can get some information here about different typewriters people use, writers who use typewriters, repair techs who talk about the goals and rewards of using a typewriter. So for me, this is a really cool read. It's got some great images in here as well. She worked with an artist to do all of our portraits. So this is a fantastic read and also really great to support another collector in the community. So I highly recommend this one as well. In addition to books that are about typewriters, you can also find magazines that are about typewriters. And you might not always see these on my shelves, but I do have somewhere a collection of typewriter-related magazines. So this is Etc., or the Early Typewriter Collectors magazine. I started getting these a couple of years ago. This again is a really cool collector's item. They do have PDFs of these online, and I've used that for information a lot when writing scripts or looking into information on typewriters. The articles themselves are written by other typewriter collectors, so again, supporting other collectors. The imagery in here is great. The quality of the magazine itself is really fantastic, so I highly recommend getting a subscription to ETC or etc. I've saved these for forever. I really enjoyed them. And again, a lot of the people I know in the typewriter community have written for etc. So if you're looking for maybe not a book, but something you can get on a routine basis that's related to typewriters, etc. is a really great option. And one other magazine, this is a newer one, and it's not entirely typewriter related, but I'm a little biased because I'm in this one. This is Novellum. This is issue 1, the first ever issue of this magazine. I was contacted by someone in the Typewriter Collectors group who mentioned that they were working on a magazine related to writing, and they wanted me to write an article for the first magazine. And so I went through and I wrote an article, the Typewriter Primer, your 101 to how do you get a typewriter, start using it, what are the things you think about. And this perspective I took was, if you were adopting a typewriter in the same way that you would adopt a house cat, how would you think about that process? So I wrote for the inaugural issue, and again, there are some other pieces in here. There's tips for finding a small press, writing support in here. This to me has just been a really cool project to be part of, and they're working on their second issue. So it's a work in progress, but William McKeever, who is the one I met with, has done a lot of work to make this literary magazine work, and I'm excited to see the next issue of this. So if you're interested in supporting another typewriter collector and maybe reading the article I wrote in here, I do recommend that. I will say when I wrote my article, I worked with some fantastic artists to help me create some imagery to go along with my article. I will link their Instagrams down below. They were fantastic to work with and just so talented and skilled. And they did this fantastic portrait of drama for the front of my article, and I absolutely love it. Did I cover everything? Maybe. This is the part of the video where I realize I completely forgot to mention The Typewriter Revolution by Richard Polt. So that's just a staple. I guess I thought in the moment that it was a given that you should have that in your typewriter library. I don't have a physical copy. I actually have the Kindle version, so you should absolutely have The Typewriter Revolution. I go to the website all the time, especially when I'm thinking about sending people typewriter shop options when they're looking for ones in their area. So absolutely put that in your library. I apologize for forgetting it in the first place. So when you are a typewriter collector, there are lots of things you can look for that are not just the physical typewriters. The advertising, the accessories, all of these can give you other options of stuff to look for when you are thrifting and flea marketing and antiquing. There's so many options out there that you don't just have to collect the physical typewriter or feel that you need to make the monetary investment in a typewriter every time you want to add to your collection. Purchasing books that are written by other collectors or a reference book or finding a display piece related to typewriters can be just as exciting as buying a physical machine itself. And again, it helps tell that broader picture of the history of the writing machine. So for me, this has been something I've been adding to my collection really in the last 2 years, adding more parts to use on machines or things that I can do giveaways with that tell, again, that full picture of the typewriter. Typewriter tins is something I'm always looking for. If you are looking for things like those, I recommend going to any section that has a lot of tin altogether. That's usually where I find my typewriter tins. Typewriters can be easier to spot, but sometimes things like the books can be harder to find or the advertisements. So look for booths where that material is their primary thing. And they might just be selling it as a book instead of a typewriter book, which might make it a little bit more affordable. So hopefully this video was helpful and answered some of your questions about the accessories that go along with being a typewriter collector. If there's anything else you found in antique stores or flea marketing or thrifting that helps tell that broader picture of the typewriter, let me know your best find down below. I'm so excited about this little Webster ribbon case. It's really cool, and I'm really excited to put on the shelf and just kind of have it to preserve that history. If you are interested in supporting any of these creators or learning some more info about the things I mentioned, all the books, all of that info will be linked down in the description below. If you're interested in more typewriter content, I do have some more videos on this YouTube channel as well as on my Instagram, just.my.typewriter. I thank you all so much for watching and remind you, you're just my typewriter. And I'm losing my voice, so maybe we're done. Did I miss anything? I sure hope not.